spatial planning in Indonesia. Thank you for coming to the 55th ISOCRAP World Planning Congress this morning. It is an honor to be here to learn from all speakers and participants, and my greatest hope that some ideas come up in this Congress can upgrade Indonesian spatial planning. Today, I would like to share with you a little story about spatial planning in Indonesia. As you all know, Indonesia, with its unique characteristic as the world's largest island country, with more than 17,000 islands, strength to more than 6,400 kilometers. Just to give you an idea, the distance is same between New York and LA. It's around 4.490 kilometers. Therefore, managing Indonesia needs extra efforts. Disparities of disparity of development in Indonesia is clearly shown. The gap between large cities and other areas is obvious. Therefore, it is our dream to lessen the development gap, so every region in Indonesia will have similar development that is suitable for their region. In order to achieve this dream, we need a tool that will guide us, give us the route map on how to manage the development in this country. This is where spatial planning comes in. As we all know, ladies and gentlemen, spatial planning is a tool which can conduct a development of a region. It is a document of our dreams and how to achieve it. Our nation development dream is compiled in a document we proudly call Rencana Tata Ruang Nasional, or National Spatial Plan. It is a guideline for us on how to utilize the space in this great nation. You can see from the slide in the front. In the National Spatial Plan, the urban areas in Indonesia are divided in a system that we call the National Urban System. Consists of national hubs, strategic national hubs, and regional hubs. Each of these hubs has its own function. The national hubs are the urban areas that is the main hub for international trading in Indonesia, a center for industry and services, main transportation hub, and those urban areas located in the coastal area that have international port. Strategic national hubs are those urban areas located on our borders. They are the gateway to our country, and we hope that this hub could generate economic growth to the region surrounding. Last but not least, we have the region hubs that are secondary hubs that support the national hub in terms of economic and urban development. In total, we have 42 national hubs, 38 strategic national hubs, and 183 regional hubs. These hubs are connected into metropolitan areas that we call national strategic area, focusing on economic development, or what we call national strategic urban area. If you can see on the slide here is on the left side. Ladies and gentlemen, you might be wondering what is a national strategic urban areas. You might heard term like Kedung Sepur. It is in the Semarang and surrounding. Sarbagita is in Bali dan Pasar and surrounding. Maminasata, this is in Makassar and surrounding. Cekungan Bandung is in Bandung, or one of the most popular one is Jabodetabek Punjur, where we are sitting right now. There are national strategic urban areas, a network of cities that are interdependent in terms of environmental development and also economic development. These cities are planned comprehensively in one spatial plan in order to control its development with each cities having their own specific function. For example, Jabodetabek Punjur, this metropolitan area is the most popular because it is where the capital is located. The focus of the national strategic urban areas is more to the environmental support for sustainable development. Another national strategic urban area that is focused on environmental aspect for sustainable development is Cekungan Bandung. This is in Bandung area. This is how it looks like. To manage the concept of these two strategic areas, similar to manage the rapid development of cities to support sustainable development. These documents are facing two main problems in their implementation. One is lack of public knowledge, and the second one is long analytical process when making the plan. These two main issues are the core of the problem in implementing all spatial plan in Indonesia. The lack of access to information for these documents causing these guidelines become dust collector in ourselves at the office. So it's just a waste book. The good news is, ladies and gentlemen, since 2018, we have a platform to shine a public light to this document. We call it Jistaru. Jistaru is a web-based geographical information system to provide public access to a spatial planning document, such as the map of the spatial plan and the main text. The purpose of this Jistaru is to familiarize the public with spatial planning, not just the word, but the concept of its content. Furthermore, with the Jistaru, we hope the public are more aware of the development in their region, and they can voice their opinion and have sense of ownership and involvement in the development. Jistaru is accessible through this address, jistaru.atrbpn.go.id. Please visit it if you mind. There you will find the complete legalized spatial plan document of the whole countries. Legalized means those that are already passed as a state regulation. As of now, all 34 of the province spatial plan are already uploaded, and 376 out of the 415 Regency spatial plan and 88 out of the 93 city spatial plan already uploaded also in the Jistaru. As Jistaru gives us public access to spatial planning document, we also need to tackle the long analytical process of composing this spatial plan. Not only the process is long, most of the time the output is not uniform, meaning one regency might have a thorough spatial analysis while the other is still only scratching the surface. We hope to answer the issue with this application through what we call the GeoPlanner and also urban GIS. These applications are still in the works, and we are hoping to start implementing it next year. Our hope is that with the help of this application, we can have standardized spatial plan in terms of quality. Furthermore, this application can help quicken the spatial analysis. Therefore, we can compose our spatial plan faster and massively. Because we still have a lot of homework to do, the biggest one is the detailed spatial plan for the urban areas in Indonesia. Through this 55th ISOCARP World Planning Congress, I hope the Ministry of Agrarian Affairs and Spatial Planning, especially Directorate General of Spatial Planning, as an institution will give a new insight through the rich discussion that we have. I also wish that you could give us input to our works or the means to collaborate for better future for this country. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your stay in Indonesia.
Thank you, Pak Uki, for your keynote speech. So it's very interesting to see how digitalization and democratization has shaped spatial planning practices in Indonesia, and we're happy to see, we're very proud to see the progress and the great strides that have been made in the last 4 to 5 years. And next, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Shipra Narang Suri, who, you know, quite frankly, doesn't need any further introduction. All of us know her personally. She's an urban planner, and she earned her PhD in post-war recovery studies from the University of York in the United Kingdom. And currently, she coordinates the UN Habitat's urban planning and design branch, and overseeing activities in 50 countries. So do we have Shipra on Skype? Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Shipra, who's will be addressing us from Kenya in the city of Nairobi. Shipra, the floor is yours. Activities in 50 countries. So do we have Shipra on Skype? Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Shipra, who's will be addressing.
Okay, good morning, Jakarta, from Nairobi. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you this morning. It's a real pleasure and a privilege for me to be with you today, though not physically present, but to be joining you online. I must also apologize for this last-minute change in the mode of presentation and for not being with you in person. Thank you, Martina, and thank you, Slavik, for accommodating my request to speak remotely. I hope you can see and hear me okay. So I was asked to give a big picture framing on the global agendas and offer some perspective on how planners can help accelerate their implementation, make it more impactful and more effective. I'm going to start my presentation in 3 parts, 3 broad segments. I'm going over the global trends very quickly because I'm sure you've heard much of that before, and mine is not the first keynote of this Congress. And then I'll shift to the evolution of the notion of sustainable urbanization in the global agendas and how it has slowly become mainstream, zooming in on the Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda. And finally, I'll use one example to illustrate how UN Habitat is making the transition from ideas to implementation to impact. I will then conclude with some lessons from experience and some reflections from the role of on the role of planners. I don't know if you can see my presentation on the screen, but I'm sure Slavik will cue me if you can't. So thank you. Let me start very quickly. Okay, seems you can't see the PowerPoint. Sorry. It says sharing. Give me 1 second. Apologies. Yep. Can you see it now? Okay, so I'm sure it'll come up in a second, but very quickly, not to waste a lot of time this morning, let me take you through a few global trends, stuff that most planners know already, though we need to keep educating other people in the world. Over half the population lives in urban areas, and this number is growing by about 1.3 million people per week. And 2/3 of the world's population is expected to live in urban areas, in cities and human settlements by 2050. So this is growing very, very rapidly. But this 54% of the world's population occupies only about 2% of the total land. So you can imagine, the density at which we live. Intermediate cities are experiencing the fastest population growth. Sorry, let me just try and share again. Apologies. The wonders of technology when they work. Okay. Trying again to share the presentation. Sadly, it's too big to now try and send it online. So if you don't see it, then I will just use this moment to make a speech and use it as my cue. All right. So most of us also know the facts about the challenges of urbanization. Cities generate 70% of the global waste. They generate 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. They're responsible for over 60% of the global energy consumption. But the fact is that cities are also generating 70% of the GDP of the global economy. So well-designed, well-planned cities can help generate higher levels of societal well-being, accelerate global economic growth, and foster sustainable development. None of these are new, but they are worth looking at again. The challenges that our cities face, the challenges of urban poverty, of inequality, of sprawl and inadequate infrastructure, of insufficient public transport, air pollution, water pollution, a combination of a surging youth population, a youth bulge as it's called in several cities, but also on the other side, an aging population. And all of these compounded by the phenomenon of climate change, which is becoming extremely important. You've all seen the climate strikes by young people all over the world who are trying to draw our attention to the biggest overarching challenge that faces us today. But the pursuit of sustainable urban development is not a new trend. Since 1976, when the Habitat I conference was held in Vancouver, in Canada, and all the way up to 2016 in Quito in October, sustainable urbanization, sustainable cities, human settlements, adequate shelter, cities for all. These are agendas that have been promoted and that have gained traction over the last 43 years. There is one big shift, however, which is that urbanization in the last 5 years or so, the shift in discourse is apparent, that urbanization is no longer seen as a problem to be addressed, as a model of development to be discouraged, or as a trend that needs to be halted in its tracks or reversed. For the first time, it is being explicitly considered, backed by evidence, of course, as a tool for development, for progress. The Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, and and all the other agendas that were adopted by the world in 2015, put forward a vision of urbanization as a source of economic wealth, as a generator of social prosperity and environmental sustainability, and cities and towns as hubs of innovation and drivers of shared prosperity. So the discourse has shifted, which is extremely important for us. First, let me go to the SDGs. I have talked about the SDGs at ISOCART before, I believe in Portland, where we talked very much about the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda. But I don't want to just talk about the SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, because that's, of course, our most important piece for urban and territorial planners and planning in the SDG wheel. But the fact is that many of the sustainable development goals have very important urban dimensions. When you talk about zero poverty, no poverty, SDG 1, there is an element of land tenure, security, and resilience there. When you talk about clean water and sanitation, naturally, there is an urban dimension there. When you talk about clean energy, when you talk about economic growth, the element of job creation and decent work and is very much there. SDG 9 on innovation and infrastructure. How can you talk about that without an urban dimension to it, right? Similarly, the one on responsible consumption, and of course SDG 13 on protecting the planet, and so forth. So there are urban dimensions which are scattered throughout the SDGs, and the targets of the different SDGs reflect those. But SDG 11 is our guiding force, so to speak. The 10 targets of SDG 11 and the 15 indicators that are set for monitoring those targets. And the 10 targets include some outcomes like on housing and slums, on transport, on cultural heritage, on public space, on disaster risk reduction, etc., but also includes some means targets like planning, like climate change, mitigation of climate change and planning for resilience, and like support to better buildings. So these are tools, these are enablers, these are means of implementation, call them what you will. But the fact is that the SDG 11 very much mainstreams and incorporates both outcome and process targets, which is very important. And from the SDGs, I also want to go to the New Urban Agenda, which is the second part of our big guiding framework on sustainable urbanization. The New Urban Agenda is seen as an accelerator to the SDGs, as an accelerator and an implementation framework for the Agenda 2030. It includes 3 transformative commitments around social inclusion, ending poverty, around inclusive urban prosperity, and environmentally resilient and sustainable urban development. But most importantly for us, and I want to make that point, that it has a very strong implementation section, which is very strong on planning. There's a whole 40-odd paragraphs in the New Urban Agenda that deal with the topic of planning and managing urban and spatial development, and additional references on urban and territorial planning and design are peppered right through the New Urban Agenda. And perhaps this is because the planning community led by ISOCART were very closely involved in the development and the adoption of the New Urban Agenda. So that's really an accelerator force to implement the SDGs. I want to highlight, because I mentioned targets and indicators, I want to highlight the issue and flag the issue of monitoring and reporting on the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda and its relationship with planning. I'll come back to this a bit later in my talk. Almost, as I said, several of the SDG targets have links to sustainable urban development. Almost all of the 244 available SDG indicators have a direct connection to urban policies and a clear impact on cities. About a third of them are being measured at the local level. On SDG 11, 7 of the 15 indicators need to be collected at the local level, and through what people call, what the statisticians call non-routine unusual methods and mechanisms. Many of these are fairly routine to planners. I mean, we work with spatial data all the time. We work with community-based data all the time, and we are starting to work a lot more with technology and crowdsourced data. But for statisticians, these are still, in so many ways, unusual sources of data. And in that discussion, a common language and an integrated data model for geospatial and statistical data becomes very, very essential, because very often you have statistical data which is structured around different administrative boundaries, and spatial data which speaks to different demarcations, and never the twain shall meet. So that is something that we need to work as planners very closely on. And the New Urban Agenda and SDG monitoring are obviously very closely linked. Technology and smart systems that we have, including some of those which are mentioned at the bottom of your screen, can help to bring in new information and help to save costs on monitoring, because monitoring, as you know, can be quite expensive as a feature. Let me, sorry, I can't seem to, yeah. So let me go very quickly, just mention that obviously the Agenda 2030 and global agendas are not just made up of SDGs and the New Urban Agenda. There are other very important elements. I'm not going to speak about them today, but there are very important elements which we should be considering in all our work. And in this particular case, I want to flag the Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement on climate change, both of which are very important for our work. Let me come to the opportunities and challenges of these global agendas, because that's where I want to talk a little bit about and make the transition to the next segment. The opportunities you see on your screen, which are, the fact that, as I said, sustainable urbanization is mainstreamed in these agendas and is accepted and acknowledged as a positive force towards development, is the big opportunity for us. And the second big opportunity, in my view, is also that the agendas go beyond just the hardware. It's not just the provision of housing and water and infrastructure and roads, but they really talk about issues of inclusion, issues of resilience, of safety, of governance, dimensions of culture, and of course the very big elephant in the room, which is on financing. So those are important cues. They're important hooks for us to anchor our work on, so to speak, to mix metaphors. Sorry, it's early in the morning here. But at the same time, there are challenges that are quite explicit vis-a-vis the global agendas. The first one being capacities. Where are the capacities? Where are the resources? Where is the data and the knowledge and the expertise to actually implement these agendas in a holistic, in an integrated way? And the reason why you see urban planning and design in the middle of that is because it's a central element of many of the global agendas, but it is both an opportunity, in my view, and a challenge. The New Urban Agenda, as mentioned, has references to urban planning and design mainstream throughout it. And the SDG indicators also, as I mentioned, include a very explicit reference on urban planning, really a sign of resurgence of planning. But it's both an opportunity and a challenge. Opportunity, I know I'm preaching to the choir here when I say that planning can help build inclusion, foster engagement, bring coherence, ensure impact at scale, etc. But it's but at the same time, it's also a challenge because of this trend predominantly. It's also a challenge for many other reasons, but this is the most important that I want to highlight. The agendas are ambitious, the tools are available, but the use of those tools, particularly the use of planning and design as a tool to realize the agendas, is on a decline. It's very strange we've always said that since the World Urban Forum in Vancouver, where the reinventing planning agenda was tabled and discussed, and over the last 15 years or so, there's been a resurgence in the planning profession and planning practice. But the impact of that, or this graph says otherwise. It says that the planned areas in cities are actually going down, and the informally planned areas that are just planned by communities but may not be part of statutory plans, for example, are going up. And the not planned areas, are completely unplanned areas, are kind of chugging along on the same level. We also see on the right-hand side of the graph that there is the informality, or the share of residential land in informal areas, is increasing in most parts of the world, except Europe and North America. And this could be, this decline in the deployment of planning as an effective tool could be due to various reasons. It could be due to time, it could be due to capacities, but I think most importantly, it is due to political will. And that is really something that I'm sure planners grapple with all the time. But that is also something that the agendas, the global agendas, can help support us in advocating for planning. That's very important, but I'll come to that in a second. So with the decline of urban planning all over the world, this is what many of the cities look like. I'm sure that is familiar, and that is even more familiar. This is what, this could be a Mumbai, this could be a Jakarta, this could be a Sao Paulo, this could be a Johannesburg, and Nairobi. This is what many of the cities look like. And then, in the name of planning, this is what also many settlements look like. None of these, you would agree with me, are examples of good planning. But the challenge is that in the name of formality, we are going, in a direction that is not really very desirable. Let me now come to my last segment, which is on the translation of these global principles and ideas for action into implementation and moving onwards from impact. So UN Habitat has distilled from all the global agendas this one single most important guiding principle, or our mantra, which is compact, socially inclusive, better integrated and connected cities and territories that foster sustainable urban development and are resilient to climate change. So we check our work against this principle, this one integrated, coherent principle, all the time. So I think what I'm trying to say is that when you set a vision, or when you set an agenda for a city or a territory, a region or a country, it's important to absorb and consolidate and then distill from all the global agendas. What is it? What is the most important, the essence of what you want to be your guiding principle for your city or for your country, and then check back against it, because obviously the agendas are huge and one can get lost in there. So from that point of distilling this central essence for our work, we try and implement it in many parts of the world. My own branch works in about 55 countries at this point, and UN Habitat works in over 90 countries of the world. I'm just taking one example, which is from Haiti, our work in Haiti, where after the earthquake in 2010, 200,000 people were killed, 1 million people were displaced. Predominantly, the capital city, Port-au-Prince, bore the brunt of the earthquake. And what happened was that people who were displaced and people who wanted to move to a safer space started converging around the settlement of Canaan on the periphery of Port-au-Prince. in about 2010. It was less than half a kilometer square if you look at the trajectory on the top right-hand corner of the screen in 2010, and by 2014 it had gone to 200,000 people living an absolute in an informally settled way, settled very, very rapidly, and the area had expanded to 22.5 square kilometers or some such. And this is now a settlement of more than 250,000 people, the fourth largest in Haiti. And we were asked at that point to come in and say, can you help manage this chaos, so to speak? Our approach, and I'm now transitioning from the idea to the implementation to the impact, our approach was guided by our commitment to a very, very broad-based participatory process involving a lot of the widest spectrum possible of stakeholders, government, non-government, international agencies present in Haiti, civil society, academia, research, planning experts, etc. And the outcome of that was that we developed a strategic development framework, a structure plan, neighborhood plans, catalytic projects, many of which are now implemented actually. Community centers, roads, public spaces have already been built. But I want to talk about 3 levels of impact of our work. The first is the human impact, the actual impact on the communities and the families, and individuals who live in these settlements, their a better quality of life and increased resilience, which is really the fundamental purpose of why we do planning. The second is the institutional impact, which is enhanced capacities and capabilities within government institutions and the communities for participatory planning and implementation of those plans. And the third is really the catalytic impact of our work, which is leading to policy reform across the country, and which is leading to scaling up of this approach. And we were asked subsequently after Canaan to intervene in 4 small intermediate cities in the south. So I'm just saying that as planners, I think we do focus on agree on the institutional impact, but to a very limited extent on the larger catalytic impact. And I'll come to that in my lessons learned. So in conclusion, really, I want to just say that I want to just extract maybe 4 or 5 broad lessons from our experience in not only in Haiti, but in all the many countries across all the continents that we work. The first is that for planning and its implementation to be effective, we have to focus on integration of different enablers. Just good planning and design is not enough, is never enough. Urban rules and regulations and the issue of financing, particularly local finance, to actually implement what is being planned and designed must be part of an integrated approach. Otherwise, it will not be effective. At the same time, you have to top and tail that with national level urban policies and local level implementation, projects to demonstrate that this can actually work. So just a 3-way integrated approach which says, okay, we'll look at rules, okay, we'll do better plans, okay, we'll have a financing model around those plans, is also not adequate. You have to combine it with something on the top and something on the ground. My third point, I think we know it, but it's worth reminding ourselves that the best guarantee of success, the best way of ensuring implementation, the best way of de-risking a project is inclusive participation and a human rights-based approach. It's not just about improving the process, but it also generates better and more sustainable outcomes. So invest in an inclusive participation process, and I'm using inclusive participation very deliberately. Not all participation is inclusive. Very often we do not have several important segments of the society and community actually engaging in a participatory process. And I use the human rights-based approach also very deliberately, because human rights-based approach goes beyond just a legalistic, formalistic approach, but really looks at a much broader commitment to the rights of human beings and communities, to adequate housing, to an adequate quality of life, and to opportunities. A fourth point that I want to point towards, particularly in this day and age, and I want to particularly flag this and take 1 minute on it, because I haven't touched upon it in my presentation, though I had initially included one more case study, but kind of dropped it because I didn't know if technology would work and we would have time on our side. Planning for climate change is not an optional add-on extra anymore. It's not something that you do on the side. You do your statutory plans and then you say we have some money left over, or we have some international grant and we do planning for climate change. No. Planning for climate change, both mitigation and adaptation to climate change, needs to be an integral part of our statutory planning processes and our statutory planning instruments. I'm sure in this room, I don't have to tell you that we are fighting to limit global warming to 1.5 C, not 2 degrees, as has been agreed in the Paris Agreement, because 2 degrees is already too high. That will need, 1.5 C pathway will need a 40 to 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030 from 2010 levels. So we need very important changes, very rapid changes, very scaled up changes in the areas of energy generation, in the areas of land use planning, urban infrastructure, cities. At the same time, cities and urban dwellers are extremely vulnerable to the impact of climate-induced disasters. So adaptation to 1.5 C and mitigation are both, they go hand in hand and must become central. I know that you have been talking about resilience and adaptation, one of the conference tracks, which is really important. And I also know you had a session on the Planners for Climate Action Initiative in the Congress. So I would encourage all of you to look at it and really join that momentum and that force. My final point on what we have learned from our experience is that the alignment of plans and actions on the ground to these global principles, targets, goals, indicators is a continuous process. It needs new tools and new capacities. And this is something that within UN Habitat we are very much focusing on now to support exactly the implementation of the projects we do on the ground, and to support their alignment to SDGs and the new urban agendas. My colleagues are from Habitat, including Rokier and Remy, are with you in Jakarta. And if you're interested really in how this is being done, I suggest you catch them. We're doing this as part of many of our projects, including the UK FCO-funded Global Future Cities program and many other projects. So, and also as part of our work on national urban policies. So, there is a lot to do. There is a lot going on, but there is a lot to do further. Some last thoughts. How can planners support real change at scale? I'm just going to synthesize what I said into 4 points. The first, I think, is that one level of actions is seldom enough. We cannot sit and say, I work only at the urban level, or I work only at the territorial level, or I work only on urban neighborhood design, or I work only at the community level. No, it's seldom going to be enough to have the impact we need. We need vertical integration from community-based action all the way up to national frameworks and policies, all the way up to international transformation of planning practice and planning education. So that vertical integration is critical for real impact. The second thing is that planning solutions are often very context specific. We also just heard from the Indonesian minister just now. And we need to build endogenous capacities, internal capacities for comprehensive planning within cities, within territories, within countries. We have to move from supporting, advising, consulting, whatever you call it, to really empowering and putting ourselves out of business. That is the end goal. People should be able to do this on their own. It should be so well mainstreamed that they shouldn't need to call you in Habitat or a progressive planning firm or someone from the outside. The third, I think, is the shift from funding to financing. So we need to mobilize. We need to reduce any kind of dependency on aid. We need to generate investment and mobilize finance for investment, but investment into the right things, an investment that is aligned to global principles, as I already said. So that is really a shift that planners can help trigger. And my final point, as we already saw in a previous slide, is data, data, and data. Really focus on data. Monitoring and reporting for the global agendas needs new forms of data, which can be generated through or linked to planning processes. So when you are designing a planning process, when you're designing a plan, when you're designing its monitoring and implementation, consider carefully what indicators you want to use and how they will feed into the global monitoring of these global agendas. I think it's a two-way street, and it can really help reinforce the urban transformation that we're looking for. And I will leave you with that image, lest we forget. The most important thing that we can do as planners is to put people at the center. Let's not forget who we are doing it for and why we're doing this. We're doing this so that we leave no one and no place behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Shipra, for your presentation. So that's a very illuminating presentation. So those of you who are collaborating or hope to collaborate with UN Habitat, or generally speaking, write proposals for a living, SDG 11 is your go-to reference, and this is a very important to keep noting that we have a new urban agenda that we need to fulfill, and we need to get the most out of our big data. So I think that's where our development is headed. Development agenda is headed. So next we have Pedro Ortiz, who is the author of the book, The Art of Shaping the Metropolis. And if you have your copy with you, he will be happy to sign it for you after the talk. And he is also a senior fellow at the New York University Marron Institute, and he has been consulting for multilateral organizations for many years, notably with the European Union, UN Habitat, World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. So Pedro, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the occasion of the invitation to ISACARP. That was my academic side of my curriculum. In the practical side, I have been mayor of the center of Madrid, and I have been in charge of the metropolis of Madrid for years, and I did the Metropolitan Plan of Madrid. So I know how hard it is to implement the proposals that we built in our planning plans. No? I must say that physical planning, spatial planning, we already know how metropolis work, and we already know what has to be done. No? We already know that metropolis have to be polycentric, that metropolis have to be intermodal, transport intermodality. We know that the metropolises have to have TODs, which is the urban design scale. UN Habitat was just mentioning the need of dialogue between the scales. We know that the urban digits have to be as well planned. That's urbanism. We have already been doing that for 170 years, so we know how urbanism is developed, and we know as well that the periphery has to be reticular and not orbital, because that provides homogeneity to the land, for a location of activities where the demand controls the market and not the supply. So we already know that. The problem is the implementation. And we have been these last 5 days already talking about that, because we run a course on metropolitan management and planning with the ISOCARP Institute on Saturday and Sunday. And in all these discussions, at the end is the problem of governance. How do we implement, how our plans do not end up in paper, in a drawer, and really transform reality. My presentation is going to be more into solutions than problems, more into an eclectical approach on those aspects of governance, and I hope that I will say things that you have never heard before, and it's going to be a lot of things, so I'm going to go very quick on that. I'm not into big words, I am more into analogies. The first point is that we are inventing a new scale. We have the architecture, scale 150, urban design, scale 1,500, urban planning, scale 1,500, and then we have national development, scale 1,500,000, the continents, regional development, 1.5 million, and the world, 150 million. And since 70 years, now we have an intermediate scale, which is metropolitan management and planning, which is the 150,000. And all these scales have different clients, from the architectural scale, which is a family or an institution, to the global scale, which are the big multilaterals or the big world powers and their institutions. No? And we have to dialogue all those scales, as UN Habitat was mentioning, and we have to find the dialogue between, because each scale has a different set of disciplines, of knowledge, and we cannot use the knowledge of one scale to do the other one. You cannot use the knowledge of architecture to make urbanism, and you cannot use the knowledge of urbanism to make metropolitan management and planning. It is a different scale, it's a different set of knowledge. This was mentioned as well in the previous presentation. The world now, historically, the world was 3 cities that were 700,000 inhabitants or more, 3 cities for 6,000 years. Now we have 500, from 3 to 500 in the last 70 years. And those 500 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants, they produce 75% of the world production, of the GDP, which means that metropolises are extremely powerful in economic terms, and we have to account for that. You cannot read this, but let me say that the red lines are the metropolis ranked within the countries, which are the black lines, ranked depending on the GDP of each of those urban units. You can find all these slides in my webpage, so for those who want to take photos, you can have as well them downloaded from the webpage. No? And as you see, out of the 100 most economically powerful units in the world, already 46 are metropolises, and they are growing, and they are growing, and they are more and more powerful. We are entering the age of metropolis, where metropolis are going to run the world rather than nations. And there are 3 types of situations nationally with metropolises. The nations where the metropolis is 60–70% of the GDP of the nation. I'm talking about Manila, the Philippines, Cairo, Egypt, Buenos Aires, Argentina. In the other extreme, the nations where the metropolis are only 5–6% of the GDP of the nation. I'm talking about the USA, Germany, Italy, China, no? And in the middle. When you have 70% of the nation GDP, which is produced by the metropolis, if the metropolis doesn't work, the nation doesn't work. If Manila doesn't work, the Philippines don't work. So it really is a national issue. It's not something to be left to the mayors to organize a metropolis, because if they are not able to organize it, and they don't have the capacity, the administration, the finance, and so on, so the metropolis doesn't work, and then the nation doesn't work. So it's really a national issue, responsibility of the president. In the other extreme, in the 5% rank, the metropolis are not a political threat to the nation. Because obviously when you have 70% which is produced in the metropolis, no president wants to give that political power to that metropolis, because then the mayor of the metropolis will become the real president of the nation. So it's very difficult to find a governance framework within the nations where the metropolis is 70%, but it's very easy to find a governance network when the metropolis are in 5%. And as a matter of fact, Germany, the metropolis, are states on their own. It's a federal system, and they are states on their own, and they have the capacity to organize themselves. No? And the metropolis is a very complex system, and they need to be able to organize the elements, the aspects of the metropolis, because if not, they don't work well. And in the middle, you have the countries where the metropolis are around 20 to 30%, which is France, England, Spain. London is 30% of the UK. Paris is 25% of France and Spain and so on. So, and in those cases, the management of those metropolis have other possible alternatives. Metropolis are not at all like cities, nothing to do with cities. A city, since always, you have the mayor, you have the deputy mayors, you have the departments, you have the chief of departments, the services, and the population. And it's a hierarchical structure, it's a pyramidal structure, it's a unitary system. Metropolis, not at all. Metropolis have many actors, many municipalities, many agencies, water, transport, sewage, and so on and so on, and many ministries, national ministries that, as the metropolis is so important, are intervening, making universities, making hospitals, making roads, highways, trains, and so on and so on. And all these institutions have to talk one to each other, to coordinate and to organize within their competences, and no one from outside can tell that institution, that administration, what they have to do. They have their own competences, and the dialogue is not a hierarchical dialogue, it's a peer-to-peer dialogue. And the difficulty is that that peer-to-peer dialogue should not be a juxtaposition of decisions. They have to be integrated in a vision, so we cannot make a Frankenstein of a metropolis. We really must do a Vitruvius man, organized and in equilibrium. And I must say that in the last 15 days, the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, has assumed this approach as a kind of official policy, and they tweeted this tweet taking those same images and making them the official position of the Inter-American Development Bank. I'm very grateful for that. I must congratulate Isaac, because when I saw the image of the Congress, I immediately saw the layer of municipalities, the layer of metropolitan agencies, the layer of national ministries, and then the national government organizing and coordinating those three layers with the help of the multilateral. So really, I really think that it represents the metropolises. And wow, what should we do? What was the next slide? Well, I do remember the next slide, so I will go on. So these two ways of organizing, the pyramidal orbital way and the reticular matrix way of the metropolises, no? The way of the dialogue is completely different. In the cities, in the municipalities, we have the top-down, bottom-up dialogue, no? The power. So that was it, no? The system in a hierarchical, pyramidal way or orbital way is, the problem is the bottom-up, top-down dialogue. The mayors have to listen to the population has to suffer the decisions made on the top, and the dialogue is top-down, bottom-up. In the other dialogue is a peer-to-peer dialogue, is a completely different dialogue. And so the way we organize planning in those types of dialogue is completely different. In the one of the municipalities, we have the regulatory plans. Our municipal plans are regulatory plans. They decide what you can do or cannot do in every plot of the city. So it's a relation between the administration and the administrated, with the commitment of the administration to do the public spaces and to do the social facilities. But it's a dialogue between the private and the public, the plots and the administration, the decisions. In the metropolis, not at all. has nothing to do with that. With the kind of plan we have is the strategic plans and structural plans, and the dialogue is an inter-administrative dialogue. It is the dialogue among the institutions whose actions are going to affect the organization of the metropolis. And so it's a different type of planning. And if you are doing in a metropolis a plan as if it were a city, but larger, you are missing the point, because in a metropolis the plan should not be regulatory, it should be strategic or structural. And we will see the difference between those two, if this works. Yeah. No. When you deal with a metropolis, you plan a metropolis, you either have the strategic plans, which might be a plan of words or a plan of figures, depending how you approach the technique of doing those plans. And then you have the physical planning, which is related in the terms of metropolis to the structural, the big sectors, how you organize the infrastructures and how you organize the environment and how you organize the housing and so on. So it is the structure of the metropolis, but you don't go into the regulatory, you don't go into the precise use of all the plots. You might do metropolitan acupuncture. You might see which are the plots that are essential for the structure of the metropolis and have big projects there, but you don't define all the land as you do in an urban plan. So we must understand that a metropolis is not a bunch of worms. The setting of streets, trains, and houses might look alike. You might think that a metropolis is like an urban area, but expanded in a different scale. But the DNA of a metropolis is completely different from the DNA of a city. So you might see a city as a worm, but if that worm becomes 1 meter wide, long, it's not anymore a worm, it's a snake. And if you intend to manage a metropolis, a worm, if you intend to manage a snake as you manage a worm, you are in trouble. And that's why we are in trouble with the metropolises, because we are applying a knowledge which is not the correct one to managing the metropolis. We are applying the knowledge of urbanism to the metropolis, and the knowledge is completely different. And how do you run a metropolis? It's not like a city, it's more like a state, it's more like a nation. And then you have, obviously, we all know the three elements, the social, the economic, and the physical. And those elements are at odds. They are always fighting each other. If you invest in economy, you are not doing social. If you are investing with an economic purpose and you are looking for efficiency and you are concentrating money and funds on increasing the productivity, you are not spreading around and spreading into the equity and accessing those people that need those social facilities. So there is at odds, and the physical, the environment, how the economy can exploit the environment. And the guys that have to make the equilibrium between the three balls which are at the bottom are the governance, and it's not only the public sector, it's as well the private sector, the public and the private sector. And what I mentioned, strategic and structural plans, the main difference between strategic and structural plans is that the strategic plans deal with all these components at the same time: economic, social, environment, and governance. And the structural plans focus more on the territorial the elements which are within the physical realm. No? And it's obviously not as simple as 4 balls. There is a lot of elements, components within each of them, and we will see some of them, not too many because we don't have the time for it. So it's much more complicated. But the fact is that all these components, all these balls are relating one to each other. You cannot just act on one, because the effects of ricochet on the others are going to be enormous, and if you don't know them, you might end up with a lot of trouble. For instance, if you increase the capacity, the human resources of a metropolis, you will increase the productivity of the labor force. If you increase the productivity of the labor force, you will increase the output of the firms that will earn more money and will have larger benefits. If you have larger benefits, can we avoid the scratching? Thank you. If you have more benefits, you will pay more taxes. If you have more taxes, you will be able to make more universities. If you make more universities, you will be able to improve. So it's a circle, it's a vicious or positive circle, and the complexity, when you have a Rubik cube with 3 colors and three sides, you have 729 alternatives. But if that Rubik cube is not 3 sides, is 5 rows and 5 lines, the alternatives are 300 trillion. No? And that is the difficulty of the metropolis, that we have 300 trillion alternatives that we have to decide and realize what is the effect of each of those alternatives. And there are effects which are positive in green arrows, and there are effects which are negative. And we as planners, we must know all the effects of those balls playing in a billiard, no? And kicking each other to realize what are going to be the effects of the policies we are going to propose. And that is not just physical. As you see, physical is just one of the sides. In the social aspect of the metropolis, we have 2 main components, the human resources and the social resources. And that is extremely important. The human resources is the knowledge we all have. We add up that knowledge and we have the human resources, and we have to increase that human resources, which is quite easy because you need 50 engineers, you take 50 young guys. Can we avoid the scratch? Anyway. You're a technician as well. You're not only the president, you're the technician. And so the human resources is the knowledge we all have, but the social resources is how we put that knowledge together to make an output that will be more than just the summing up of the knowledge of each of us. 1 + 1 engineers equals 2, but if they have social resources, 1 + 1 engineers equals 2.5 or 1.5. And those social resources is what we call collective intelligence. And that is really what makes the metropolis strong. Because a metropolis is like a computer. A metropolis is like a computer. You have the hardware and you have the software. And what is worth in a metropolis is not the hardware. I'm sorry for the architects and the builders, the developers and so on. It's not the hardware. What is worth in a computer is the software. Because a computer, the hardware is to $1,000, $2,000, no? But the software is worth millions. And the software in a metropolis is us. And that software is as well composed as in a computer of data bank and programs. And the data bank is the human resources, is the data, no? But how you combine that data is what really is worth in your job, and what you do with it. It's not just accumulating data, it's how you use that data for an output. And that's what makes a metropolis competitive and equitable and sustainable or not. So that collective intelligence is really what matters, and not only the human resources. And collective intelligence is the capacity of a group to make the right decision in a reasonable span of time. And I would say reasonable span of time, because if you take 20 years to make the right decision, really that's not very intelligent. And there are countries that have collective intelligence and others that don't. I'm not going to mention anyone because that will be politically incorrect. No? And there are metropolises that have collective intelligence and others do not. And I'm thinking about one that 20 years ago I told them where they had to put the airport, and they have taken 20 years and $17 million to decide that the airport had to be where I told them 20 years ago. And another one, the two of them are in a Latin American country. And the other one that it was obvious that they had to expand beyond the valley that they were enclosed into, and in 3 years they already made a plan, a master plan, that took them out of that valley. And so it's not only to make the right decision, but it's to do it in a span of time. And collective intelligence, the empirical approach to how to develop collective intelligence, and we are doing that in metropolitan planning, is a process of a confederation, of putting together the mayors and telling them, look, let's go through 3 stages. Let's go through 3 stages. The first one is cognition, let's share our experiences. The second one is coordination, let's copy one to each other to coordinate the metropolis. The third one is cooperation, and let's work together in projects so we can build up the metropolis. And sometimes you really create an agency for that. And that kind of approach that we see that a lot in metropolis around the world is insufficient. You better have that than nothing, because at the end what you get with that is a confederation of municipalities and not really a metropolitan government, which is what is required to manage the complexity of the metropolis. So that kind of approach, the municipal confederation, is putting the worms together in a bunch of worms, but what you really need is a system of governance that will require, that will be able to address. And those systems of governance is either federal or unitary, and that's the difficulty with the national governments, which are afraid of metropolis getting too much power if they have a system of government that will allow them to work. The other approach to collective intelligence, as I mentioned in the previous one, in this one you see cognition, cooperation and coordination. The second approach to collective intelligence, and we have not yet blended the 2 approaches together, is the similarity to psychoanalysis as social psychoanalysis. In a metropolis you have the superego, which are the ambitions of the metropolis, and in a metropolis you have the id, which are the basic needs and the basic desires of the metropolis. And generally, you have the confrontation, when you are planning a metropolis, you have the confrontation between the superego, which is the corporate elites that make the strategic plan, and the id, which are the basic needs of the population that are generally what the population is asking. And when we do our planning, we are more into the strategic corporate state of the superego, and we must realize that the politicians, which are in the middle, are the ones that, after all, have to find the balance between the needs and our ambitions in our planning. So many times we say, well, the plan was perfect, but it has not been implemented. The fault is not of the implementers. The fault is on the planners that did not realize which was the setting where the plan had to frame and to work out for that. And in the physical sector, the structural plans that we are more used to it, no? We have 5 elements, of which 2 are continuous, transport and environment, and 3 are discontinuous, and it is the difficulty of managing the interaction among them. And that was again said by UN Habitat, the coordination among them is an absolutely essential element. But when you have all these sectors, all these balls, and you try to organize the management, the governance of all these elements, interaction, 9 sectors that have in themselves elements inside, the alternatives are in the range of 400 million. So when you have people that describe the different ways the different metropolises have found to manage transport or environment or housing and so on, and you go on describing every metropolis with the alternatives, you will end up with 400 million possible alternatives. And there are not 400 million. There are only 3 alternatives, which is the way in which nations are organized. Metropolis have to look at nations rather than cities in the way they organize themselves. I am skipping because I've been told that the time is running. And nations, there is only 3 ways of organizing nations. And so metropolis have to look at those ways to see how to organize a metropolis. You can have a nation which is unitary, you can have a nation which is federal, and you have nations that become confederal. And the history of the world, we have had the three types of nations, but at the end, confederal nations do not work. The Greeks were a Hanseatic League, were confederal. The Germans, the Greeks were the Panathinaika, the Athens Panathinaika. The Germans were the Hanseatic League, and so on. At the end, these confederations dissolve. And the only two ways we have in the world are federal or unitary. And I must say that the European Union now is a confederation, and you know the problems of the European Union. So if we build the metropolises as confederations, we rather have that than nothing, but at the end it doesn't work. So this getting together the mayors and having them talking and coordinating and cooperating is fine, but it's not enough, and that's not the way of running a metropolis. A metropolis has to be run by the federal or the unitary system. And in the unitary system, you have two alternatives. The centralized one, when the ministries make the decisions in all the territory at the same time, and the decentralized one, when you have governors or appointed members by the president in areas of the nation, like in France, for instance, les préfets appointed by the president, that the role is to coordinate the functions of the different ministries within that area. And that decentralized system can be very well applied in the metropolis when we are in a situation where the main metropolis puts at risk the political power of the president. Instead of having people elected to run the metropolis, people appointed by the president that will limit the risk, the political risk of the president. So you see these four alternatives, but if we take out the centralized by ministries, because it doesn't work, the Ministry of Health makes a hospital somewhere and the Ministry of Transport makes a road somewhere else, and they don't work together. If we take out the centralized ministries, the unitary, central unitary, and the confederation of mayors that do not have the capacity to organize, we end up with two alternatives for organizing the metropolis: the federation and the centralized delegated system. And generally, the border between the two systems is around the 30% GDP of the metropolis related to the nation. Under 30%, the national president is not afraid of the power of the metropolis, so you can play a federal organization. Beyond 30%, the central government is afraid of the power of the metropolises, and then you have to play more of a decentralized unitary system. And at the end, if you convince the president to make a decentralized system with prefect, with governors, and so on, after 30 or 40 years, the people will say, well, instead of being appointed by the president, why don't we elect these guys? And because the issue is the guy who runs the metropolis, who's accountable to? He's accountable to the president that has appointed him, or he's accountable to the population that has elected him. And so the only difference is that the accountability to the population or to the guy that has appointed you. So if you start by creating the metropolis appointed, at the end, a democratic movement might ask, well, why not shift it and let's have a federal metropolis? I was going to go into finance, but I think I'm too late and you want me to skip that. You want me to skip it or not? 3 words. All right. This is a curve, wound curve, frequency wound curve, that shows how the proportion of the public sector versus the private sector produces efficiency or produces mismanagement. If you have a country to the left corner without public sector, it doesn't work, because the private sector needs the public sector to produce the indivisibles of justice, police, streets, public spaces, and so on. You cannot have a laissez-faire economy, because then you are in the jungle and it doesn't work. If you have a nation absolutely controlled by the government with no private sector, it doesn't work either. So you have two peaks of the two systems. One is the free market system, is the controlled market system. And the free market system is more efficient, and that's why the height of the curve is higher. Not more equitable, but more efficient. And the efficiency is then summed up by the height of the curve, and the maximum of efficiency is found between 30% of public sector versus 50%. That is the range of efficiency, 30% to 50%. But the difference is that the marginal return of the economy, that means the efficiency of the last dollar that you have invested, is the slope of the curve. So you are more efficient in terms of investment when you are in 30%, but you are more efficient in overall results when you are 50%. And that is the range where nations work. And you have nations that are closer to the 30%, like, for instance, the United States, that we think that there is very little government and they don't want to have much government. They are in 37%. No? And the countries that have already gone beyond the 50%, like France, which is 56%. No? And when the United States, that has very little government, has 37%, and Guatemala has 10%, how do you want to develop in a competitive and efficient economy when you only have 10% of government? So we need a certain amount of government. And you see how some countries are beyond the limits. They are trying to pull back. Macron in France, Eric, is trying to pull back those figures, and he confronts society, and others do not even reach. Then the second point is, out of that public sector, how much is central government and how much is local authorities, metropolitan and local authorities? And the normal share of those local authorities is around 30% of the whole public sector. There are countries like the Netherlands where you have 46% is run by the local authorities, other countries like India where 1% is run by the local authorities. But the range of efficiency is around 30%. I am telling something that no one has ever told you. So really, I hope that this will open a discussion, and you can download from internet, from Google, Pedro B. Ortiz Metropolitan Financing, no? How this works and how. And that makes that, for instance, in America, where we think that there is very little government and they want to control the government, the local authorities have 17% of the GDP of the nation, and that means that every American municipality has per capita $9,000 per year to do investments in the municipality. An American municipality has $9,000. An Indian municipality has $2. How do you want to develop a competitive economy with that kind? So you can see that in that report. I'm telling you how you organize the finances. And as a rule of thumb, I think the next one is a rule of thumb, you have 12% of the GDP of the nation should be run by municipalities, should be run by metropolises. So it's very easy to know the size of your city, the GDP of your nation. You multiply by 0.13, there is 0.12. You multiply by the number of population that you have in your city, and you see what would be an efficient budget for your city, able to do all the investments with the private sector, public-private sector together. So, if you see in that report, you see comparison of the different countries and even some cities, and you see that they are in that kind of range. Some are 50% over, others are 50%, and that depends on the capacity of the will, political will of central government to control the finance. So this is the end. Making a project and developing a metropolis is like having as an objective to hanging a painting on the wall. The objective is obviously to introduce art in your life, no? But you have to understand that the project and the governance, the project and the institution, the management of that project have to be related. Because if you want to hang the painting, you either have to use a nail and a hammer, or a screw and a screwdriver, or a hook and a whatever, I don't know how that's called. No? You have to integrate the project and the governance. Because when you do that, then you have different alternatives to screw the screw in the wall. If you are more technological, you are Hollywood filming, you will have a power broke with the engine, And if you are in the developed countries, Nollywood film industry, you will be much more basic and you will have just a simple screw. But you must understand that the screw has to go with the screwdriver. You cannot just design the screwdriver without knowing if you are going to use a screw or a hook. Then you can calibrate the institutional system, the governments of the metropolis. Once you know that you have a screw, you have to select which is the kind of right screwdriver. Because if you don't do that, if you say many multilaterals have been trying to implement projects and they were not able to implement the projects, no? Because there was not an institution able to implement the projects. So what they have said, no, the problem is not the projects, is the institutions to implement the project. If you only focus on the institutions and you don't know what are the projects that you are going to end up having to, you might end up designing a pizza cutter to hang your wall. So you will end up eating pizza instead of having a wall in the painting. Thank you so much.
Another round of applause for Pedro Ortiz. So how about that? And so we're short on time. Next I will invite Martina, our Congress rapporteur. But I just wanted to note that that really resonates, what you talked, Pedro, it resonates with what Minister, His Excellency Bambang Brojonegoro
what it is in Jakarta compared to Milan, where I grew, compared to London, where I work, compared to other places I know where I work. So I invite you to go on his websites and look and try to translate those numbers into experience. Also, making a link between Shipra and Pedro, the role of the plan, planning is an element of a group of items, a group of tools. I'm lost between worms and snakes and screwdrivers, but you know, how do we need to think at the whole and as the whole, and also never forget, never assume that we have all the answers. All the answers are all part of a collective. And of course, the collective also involves how we relate at the different scales, you know, the government and national scale, and down to the scale of the people and the livable city that has been the discussion. And also is very important is a circle again. You know, the livable city is very high on the agenda here locally, and then it's also a very high concern for the national government, and therefore needs to translate in the governance of cities as well. How do we translate, you know, how do we implement this broad participation that Shipra was talking about, essential for success? Participation of the ministries, of the international scale, but academia, experts, community groups, residents. So the strategies and then the projects on the ground and how they link together. So that architecture, I don't want to use architecture as a fixed word, but sort of like the structure of how we connect all of these scales together also needs a plan, just like the physical plan itself, and how we implement that, how we take people with us. And the role of data. This was the first and the second and the third presentation. Data is essential, and the data platforms and the ability to link data and to develop indicators, and indicators that are progressively more intelligent. This Gistaru here for Indonesia, that is at the beginning and will obviously evolve with time as the technology evolves and indicators evolve, and how that can be the platform where people can understand what's going on, the governors and the state leaders can understand what's going on, and more the complexity can be at least understood and welcomed as a part of society, as a part of interesting cities, as a part of success. We need to embrace that complexity. So this is a very quick and very sketchy summary of very interesting presentations so far. And now we are going to give the floor to the young and dynamic people. Come on, come up.
Selamat Sang. Please don't go anywhere. We are waiting for this for a week, and our team is so excited to share the workshop results with you. Just take your coffee outside and come back. Please wait for us. So I'm highly honored and I'm very excited as the director of YPP program to welcome you in the plenary and the closing ceremony, of course, for our 2019 Jakarta Bogor Young Planning Professionals Workshop. I want to thank our hosts, the Indonesian Association of Urban and Regional Planners, but mostly Mariana Kesuma, Nadia, Aya, Rahma, Lestari, and Rais Kandash. Your incredible commitment, excitement, success, and hospitality made the 48th YPP workshop of Isocarp a unique and delicious experience. Thank you. Terima kasih. So thanks, Thanks also go to our coordinators, my team, Michael Stott, Tiark Gall, Rene Fuswefun, Haley Phillips, Bima Punama, Inez Darmalia, Arya Lahasaputra, Adipandang Yudong. So from Canada to Malaysia to Indonesia, this great team made everything possible. And of course, our YPPs, 50 young planning professionals from 20 countries, showcasing the global outreach of Isocarp, as always. Defining an alumni pool of 1,028 young professionals in 28 years. It's a great success. So I'm honored to know you all, our YPPs. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for sharing with me and our team your professional journey and your youthful excitement, and thank you for becoming part of our Isocarp world. It is in such days where we become aware why young generations, why we need them, the future leaders of our profession, and also we become aware that why this program is a crucial component of ISOCARP's dedication to facilitate knowledge for better cities. So I hope this workshop will leave a permanent and creative mark on your future careers and enrich your horizons as young planning professionals. I want to see all of you as members of our society. So to keep in short, we focused on the idea of livability in our workshop. We all aware that human settlements around the world are undergoing profound changes as a result of political-economic restructuring, global urban transformation, while on one hand, as we listen from our speakers previously, the Asia-Pacific regions have become the centers of the global economy, there is still urgent need to take action. Take action to resolve the challenges regarding social inequality, social justice, local economic development, environmental sustainability, climate change, and resilience to natural disasters. So overcoming the challenges requires a change of emphasis in the way we use, react, organize, and manage our settlements, and this workshop is part of this change perhaps. So it is therefore each YPP workshop is a call for reinventing planning, exploring the unfamiliar, and thinking beyond the limits. Thus, with its unique theme and setting in two cities, Jakarta and Bogor, I think it provides a way to inspire urbanism and planning beyond limits. So, within minutes, you will see the results of only 3, and even we can say true today, urban laboratory, and a narrative, an urban narrative that was built upon exploring alternative futures and strategies for livable communities beyond of metropolises and limitless cities. So please welcome the 48 alumni of ISOCARP Young Planning Professionals program. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before we go through the presentation of each group, I would like to give a brief info so that you all know what is the case study for our workshop. I'll try to make it quick because I think the important one is for the groups to go through all the result. So the first case study area. Yeah, this one. We have two locations this year in Jakarta and Bogor. The first case study area is the red one, is the transit-oriented development in Duku Atas. It is located in the central Jakarta. It is the intersection of 3 major transport nodes. There are MRT, the Transjakarta, which is our bus rapid transit system, and the train network, including the train network system, the airport, and the Greater Jakarta train network system. It is the first transit area built by Jakarta's government, and this location is very unique because it's surrounded by the office and retail buildings, but also on the west side we have the high density housing area, as we call it, kampung. And on the east part of the area, the TOD area, we have the heritage and conservation housing area. This location is expected to be further equipped with various mass transportation, such as LRT, and become an interconnected place between diverse transportation nodes and a pedestrian-friendly urban environment. So we think that the TOD area in Duku Atas has the opportunity to become, or as a role model to TOD's development across the country. And the second side, we have Bogor, the green one. The second side is the Chinatown district in Bogor. It is known as Jalan Surya Kencana, or I will call it short Surken. It has been built since 1808 as part of a 1,000-kilometer long post road. It was known as the center of Bogor's trading economic activities, hence it became the economic pulse of Bogor city since the Dutch colonial period. It spans for 1 kilometer long from the north side to the south, with the Bogor Botanical Garden, the infamous Bogor Botanical Garden, just across the entrance of the Surken. And alongside this streetscape, it has been strongly developed as commercial street, with different ethnics, languages, and cultures meet inside this road. The challenge with this site is to rethink an integrated urban and landscape design, able to balance revitalization and conservation so it won't lose its identity over time, while fostering economic development, sustainability, and a renewed livability for the local communities. So this is the two sides that the YPPs have been trying to see, and I will call the first speakers of the group to proceed with the presentation, so I might give the floor to Yasin. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think also from our side, on behalf of the YPP group, I think we should also thank ISOCARP for bringing this marvelous and beautiful group together from very diverse and international from different backgrounds. We would also like to thank Jakarta and Bogor for their hospitality and for giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts and maybe inspirations about Jakarta and Bogor projects. In my group, this beautiful group that you see in the picture, we try to think beyond TOD as a mere infrastructural or transport infrastructure, but more like a vehicle for achieving social inclusivity and creative development. That's because we think that Dhaka Atas is the embodiment of many issues that Jakarta and Indonesia are facing. Talking here about the issue of inequality, how to share the benefits of urbanization among the losers of the system, the questions of infrastructure and environment. So we started our journey with three maybe standpoints. The first one is to say that TOD should be context sensitive. We don't want to trade the identity of the city for flashy corporate buildings. The second one is that it should be inclusive, as we said, bringing also the question of kampongs and informality and the losers of the system, as I said. And it should also be not only about infrastructure, but also about the human experience in general and the human and the experience of the commuters. With the limited time that we had, we tried to immerse ourselves in the site, try to have some interviews with the kampong leaders, try the transport system, and try to see how that commuter experience in the site. I think we should also congratulate Jakarta for this beautiful site and the beautiful project, because they did tremendous work. But we identified three main cracks, I would say, three main areas that actually I think should be considered in the future development. So we're talking here about environment and health hazard, which is a big issue on the site, the issue of the kampong and the relocation of the residents and the limited transit experience. We're going to go through it. So these are just a few interventions that we thought about. There's what you see here on the left side is the basin, kind of a reservoir with filthy water, also kind of creating a huge health hazard for the residents. And what we tried to do is maybe to improve it, bring in the water into the site, as you saw, and expanding that waterfront, which can be also used in that way, kind of try to improve the quality of the water, create a water park around it, and kind of also include some public spaces that benefit both the local residents and the new development. The second strategy, or the second element that we thought about, was to create even an economical and spatial system that would benefit the local kampong residents instead of relocating them. So we thought of restructuring the kampong, densifying it, but the land that is provided afterwards can be given back to the community as a shared ownership, where they can actually be part of that development, not as stakeholders, but also as shareholders. And that can be also can be used for kind of an infrastructure like that, a public space where the kampung residents are investors and can be used in different ways in a very multifunctional manner. Can be a market, can be a food court. And the third strategy and the last one is actually about placemaking. So for the moment, the nodes and the activity is around the stations, and we try to bring that energy inside the site so that the whole area would benefit from that development. So we try to create spaces to slow down, to pause, also to, as I said, to bring the people inside the site and benefit from these spaces that we create. One very small example is to turn the current road into a shared space, which can be activated between night and day and bring, again, that energy inside the site. So these are our 3 interventions. If you have any questions, we are available for you. Terima kasih. My colleague Angga will talk about a very fascinating project that they call Sustainability.
Hello, thank you everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Currently I'm working for the Jakarta Provincial Government and I'm involved in this very extraordinary workshops from the ISOCORP and YPP. So right now I'm gonna delivering my team presentation about sustainable Jakarta. This is consists of 5 persons. I'm including as one of them. First, we are getting to the challenge and the vision. The challenge of we are addressed here in the social inequality, and we take the vision of the justice and sustainability, so it makes the sustainability. We come from the highly development in Jakarta as the capital and center of economic of Indonesia has brought many problems that need to be concerned to minimize the disparity. TOD Duku Atas as the CBD of Jakarta become the most increased development, which also experience issues including injustice, poor environment, and inequalities. So we're getting to the from the strategic level to the local level and the micro level. The analysis is broader from the regional analysis, how the connection between the TOD Duku Atas and the other TOD around Jakarta, and we come up to the local land use inside the TED Duku Atas area, and we're going to design principles about the some of the key design principles that I will mention you later. Yeah, this is the design concept. We are getting to 3 phases from the 2020, 2025, and until 2040. The phase 1 is we'll make some soft micro interventions, and this is the cutting of the road sections from the phase 1 2020 that we are currently have 3 lines of motor cars and 1 bus lane, and the second phase we are trying to introduce one bike, converting one car line into the bike lane, and for the phase 3 we want to remove all of the car lanes and maintaining the Transjakarta highway. This is the table implementation that we'll need. There are 18 interventions that we are proposed from phase 1 to phase 3. Okay, this is several key points that we are interventions during the phase 1 on 2020. We're adding 2 crossings, regulate and improve speed, because there's a very disparity between the pedestrian crossing time with the car speed. And the third one is create the online motorbike drivers pickup point area with some incentives. The phase 2 around to 2025, we will propose several interventions like greenerify the highways and the water basin, and we will reintroduce the water system infrastructure that previously was concerned by the provincial government. And the third one is to, there's an informal settlements, and you can say in the red area here is urban kampung. We want to relocate them or want to empowerment to make a vertical buildings for affordable housing in the city. So the last part is the 2040 design with three basic principle approach. For first one, this is green spine across the section from the Bundaran HI until the statue of Mr. Sudirman. The second one is reconnect with water infrastructure, and the third one is community design. Thank you very much. This is the projection of what will be going to in the next 2040. Thank you. Okay, I will introduce the next presentation from Felicia. It's about work, live, and play.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm presenting for Team 6, and this is our design intervention for TOD Duku. So, we're starting from seeing what's actually on the site. So, we see the main problems happening in Duku is social segregation and also air pollution. But the site also has a big potential on its location because it's very strategic, and it will have 5 different public transport in the future. So our vision for TOD Duku Atas is connecting people in the heart of Jakarta, meaning we want people to actually able to use the place so that TOD will not only be transport interchange, but also be destination itself. So for people to actually use the place, we provide work, live, and play. For work, our strategy is to connect. By connect, we say we integrate 5 public transport with mix of uses. And for live, our strategy is to revitalize. And by revitalize, we say we want people to have a very walking and cycling oriented street. Right now, the street is car oriented, but later, after we make a walking and cycling, the environment will be very inclusive and people can actually enjoy the walk. And for play, we have strategy of activating. And by activating, we mean we connecting the green and blue network in the side and then activating it into an open public space and everyone can enjoy it. So this is how we map our work strategy. The first thing that we did is centering the mixed-use development along the transit corridors. And then the next important thing is that we integrate 5 different public transport to create a new commercial nodes. And this new commercial nodes can be night market or other public markets. And this can be the destination of the TOD area. And this is how we illustrate how we plan to connect the mixed-use developments with the public transports. And the next thing is about lift strategy. This is our map on lift strategy intervention. The first thing that we did is we redesigned all the roads that is now car-oriented become walking and cycling oriented. And then the red dots is the cycling facilities that we plan to provide, like bike renting and bike racks, so that people can have a very easy access to bikes everywhere they go around the area. And then the next thing that we do, the most important thing, is also the revitalization of the existing kampung. How we do the revitalization, first we close the street inside the residential area from cars. And then the street become more safe. And then we activate the retail's activity inside the residential areas, like small shops and kiosks. And then the alley inside the residential area will become active open public space. And this is how we illustrate the concept of revitalizing the existing kampung in Duku Atas. And the next strategy is the play strategy. Basically, the main idea is to connect the green and blue network in Duku Atas. And after we connect all of them, we activate them so that people can actually do a lot of activities in the area. And in the future, later, we will have a green-blue network loop surrounding the area. So this TOD area can be the oasis of the city. And this is how we conceptualize how people can start using the river and start putting all their activities oriented to the river. Because right now, everyone is turning their backs from the river in Duku Atas. So that's all from our team. And next, I will give the time for my colleague Sid with Adaptive TOD.
I'm really sorry to interrupt these beautiful presentations for an announcement. I just wanted to reassure you all that the next sessions will be delayed because this session is delayed. Unfortunately, there will be coffee on the run. Imagine you are in New York, grab and go to your sessions. But yes, for all the speakers that are about to start in the next slot, they are going to be delayed until we finish here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Felicia. I think I'm going to just move there quickly. So we just wanted to, I think all of my colleagues have really set up the case study in a very good sense. So what we wanted to look at in a larger area, this is a beautiful team that we're working with, by the way. So again, I think pointing out where Duku Atas is in the larger Jakarta area, the idea for us was to look at not just Duku Atas in its individuality. The idea was to look at all the TOD areas around that are up for development and really provide certain ideas for not just one area, but try and integrate different areas, of course, with context-specific situations when they're about to be developed. So for us, we wanted to understand the context, who are we working for, what are we working with, and why are we doing it in the first place. So for all the government officials really out there in this room right now, this is sort of an ideas proposal for you to when you negotiate with the master developer who takes up the land, to intervene on them and tell them that these are the different concepts that you need to work with and ensure that you integrate back in your development. What is, of course, a new TOD development within the heart of Jakarta, and why it was very important to us was we're setting up a new standard for TOD developments within the city, and not just for the city for the next 20, 30 years of transit-oriented development to come. Moving on, we wanted to observe the site with 4 different ways, but these were something that emerged when we walked around the site. Fabric was one. These are the historic kampung elements that we felt had to be preserved and restored. Water, of course, has its reapplicability and reuse, as previous colleagues mentioned. Streets, redevelopable land, where the opportunity is really around the transit. So bringing all these elements together, the idea was, how do you develop these 4 elements and then have its applicability when we talk about adaptive reuse? But in this case, we sort of try to focus on fabric because we felt kampungs and different fabric that we have were really important to Jakarta to integrate into the community. So I'm just going to quickly talk about fabric in this case. Restoring kampung we felt was very important as well because they're often neglected in the community. So we sort of came up with a distance approach sort of a thing. So the furthest away you are from the transit, the more opportunity is to preserve the existing fabric, the existing kampung areas with rejuvenated community spaces and really improve the attractiveness of these areas. The closer you move to the transit, that's where you start to integrate a mixed-use residential component in it as well. But you still maintain certain elements of the kampung as well. And then really when you adjacent to the transit, that's where the maximum amount of land value that you can capture as much as possible with integrating new public plazas as well as restoring and rejuvenating the existing kampung elements that we choose to preserve they can act as attractors. Again, stepping back to a larger area, the idea was going back to those 4 elements and looking at all the possible TOD areas that are up for redevelopment, and then really look at how do you apply these 4 elements into different TOD elements. Just a quick glimpse of what it might look like in the future, and then different development heights and etc. So I think this is what we sort of came up with, and that's it. Thank you. I think I was the last one to present the TOD case, the Jakarta case study. I think we're going to move on to Vaishali, who is going to present the Bogor case studies now with her option for Dragon Spine.
Hello everyone. We are the Dragon Spine team. We would like to tell you about it later on. Our study case is the Surikantana Street. The main problem we saw while walking down the area is that there was a disconnection in the space and the time, meaning that the heritage value which was told to us was quite not visible. There were problems related to the traffic jam, pedestrian walking, poor building structure, and inhabitant building. There was no trace of heritage to it. Therefore, we channelized down our main issues into the 3 key points, which is connectivity, identity, and visibility. From our research, the area we found out that the layout of the area was based on the dragon spine, meaning that the heart of the head of the dragon is a Chinese temple, whereas the heart is the street, the Surikantana Street, which represents the movement where basically the heart lies. Therefore, the strategic approach at a bigger scale, regional scale, for our area has been focused on the 2 main rivers, which passes parallel to the Surikantana Street. There is a possibility to create a green regional connections by activating the pathways alongside the river. Surikantana in this setting can be used an intermediate green route corridor emerging from the botanical garden. From the inside interventions, we first wanted to deal with the concept of connectivity by connecting the Surikantana Street with the botanical garden as a green corridor by using the idea of green pergolas, furthermore making the alleys more pedestrian friendly. Our approach was to bring more pedestrians back to the citizens by getting more street design elements that can make them feel better. As you can see in these sections, we showed how the street could be transformed, the present to the future street area by focusing on expanding the footpaths, revitalizing the front facade of the building, and proposing how to make the by adding more artistic value to it. Our second key element was the identity. We proposed to bring back the lost identity of the area using street design elements, which are the characteristics of Surikantana Street. Other than that, we proposed to implement new activities that we proposed that will be different during the day and the night. At night, it will be more, as you can see here, at night it will be more retail spaces, whereas in the morning it will be the running car street. So here you can see the vertical elements using the Dragon Street, how the vertical structure can be characterized. We use the elements of the dragon to brand the value of the area, which has been dismissed. Therefore, we opened up the public pocket parks with the urban furniture, adding more livability in this area. Here you can see one of the visualization of the street, how it will look like in the day, while how it will look like in the night, showing how different activities can be characterized into the area. Here is our beautiful team, the Dragon Spine team. I would like to introduce now our next group, Bogor, who will connect the Bogor through the soul.
There it goes. All right. Thank you, everybody, and Selamat Pagi, if it's still morning. My name is Ruve. I'm from South Africa, and our team would like to present Bogor Connecting Heart with Soul. It is a refocus on nature and the people of the city of Bogor and the area of Surikantana. Just a quick photo of the entire team. So let's start with what we see. Yes, we saw the layout and the landmarks, such as the Chinese temple, the bridge, the market, the streets and the people. But it's also what we felt. This is just a sketch, a kind of a snapshot of the cityscape as we experienced it. So firstly, Bogor is green, it's ecologically alive, it's biophilic. Unlike the larger urban concubation, it is also intimate, authentic, and a little bit frenetic. And thirdly, if we look at the space, it's smaller, slightly disconnected, compartmentalized, and also segregated. So together, these observations inspired our 3 layers, which you can see is nature, culture, and connectivity. And we hope by combining these themes that it would support the daily frequency of life in Bogor as is represented by the graphic. I just want to mention as well that our vision is, our planning vision is inspired by regenerative planning as well as tactical implementation. All right, so moving on to layer 1, which is our base layer nature, connecting the green heart. We envision a green sanctuary that extends from the botanical garden, which we believe is the best resource for Bogor, up through Suri and Chana. The street should be the green pulse. If the garden is the heart of the city, it should be ecological, more climate resilient, and also healthy. We propose by doing this through policy and interventions such as urban forestry, urban agriculture, garden roofs, and so forth. And this is just a representation of what we envision the street would look like. All right. And then layer 2, building on the first layer, which is blending cultures. Culture is a very messy, complex, and abstract concept, and we believe that it should be delicately approached to not alienate the system which is at hand. We believe in creating a continuum of cultures, starting with the Chinese gate, as you can see at the beginning of the sketch, concentrating it and moving it upwards to include Sundanese, Arab, and Dutch heritage. Food communicates internationally, and we suggest public spaces for food and co-creation where people can be exposed to each other and their daily lives. We want something that's authentic, even if it includes the informal. Just a revitalization of the Chinese gate, as I mentioned. And then finally, the third layer, enhancing livelihoods. This is about connection. The surrounding community needs to be drawn in. Without their buy-in, we believe any development would be unsuccessful. The Bogor Yoga Mall, which is at the very beginning across the Botanical Garden, should be redeveloped as a skills development center so that people can be upskilled and that they can share in the economy. This building can also become an icon of Bogor, looking out over the garden and the network. Further to this, as you can see with the yellow, street art should be used as a way for people to take ownership of the alleyways connecting the development in Suri and Chana Street to their homes. And finally, policy should address abandonment and social blight so that the life and frequency of the street is balanced and harmonious. So in summary, that's just how we imagine the landscape to look like. These are the alleyways with some street art. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. In summary, we imagine a green sanctuary which embraces localism and all its facets. It should draw everybody in, but this can only be done through political support, responsibility, community buy-in, and respect. We believe that connecting the green heart of the city, which is the garden, with the soul, which is the people, is key. Thank you. Right, and next up is Dan, and he will present one step at a time.
Good morning, everybody. I'll try to be short and sweet because I see some sleepy faces already. I'm here representing the third team. We also worked on the Bogor case, and I'd like to walk you through our plan one step at a time. So this is our team on a site visit. And what we saw at the site, echoing some of my colleagues, is really a one-way road centered on car-centric kind of thinking and is really congested. But next to this, I think it's also important to emphasize that there's cultural heritage present. It's really a historical neighborhood, and there's really visible social networks there worth preserving in the process of revitalizing this neighborhood. A last key point in drawing the context that I'd like to emphasize is that the municipality plans to widen the sidewalks, but this has been met with some resistance from local shop owners due to the perception that reduced parking spaces may mean reduced commercial activities. So in our approach, we hope to kind of resolve this tension to some extent. So our vision is to inspire Bogor to become a more connected and livable city by introducing a walking-friendly, accessible, and healthy Surya Kencana street. We hope to introduce a two-phased approach to do this. In the first phase, we'd suggest to experiment, use different kind of place-making methods with temporary, low-cost kind of installations to really understand what does and what doesn't work in this space, what does and doesn't work for this community. And in the second phase, we'd suggest to implement the learnings and actually plan spatial interventions based on that. So what are the first steps? I'd like to give you a few examples of what could happen in this space. We thought of introducing a no-car day. This could serve as a first test for seeing how the street functions without cars, but it could also be a platform to test how the transport that runs through the street could work on alternative routes. We also thought of introducing a market day. Here you could really build on already existing social networks and create a platform for community engagement as well. We thought of introducing parklets to already see how it works if we remove some of the parking spots and introduce different kind of activities to the street. We also noticed that there's space for decorative items, above the eyesight level, for example. And what we also notice is that in the neighboring alleyways, some places there is already some street art and different kind of creative elements present. But I think the power of really concentrating on these alleyways lies in attracting more foot traffic to the area. We also thought if we want to introduce a walking street, there's potential to already test how temporary kind of green installations would work in that space. So turning to our final steps, I'd like to re-emphasize that it's key to first to experiment, to learn from these experiments, and then build a plan based on that. We have an idea or a vision what could become based on this. At spaces that allow, we'd like to introduce 2 tree lanes. We'd like to introduce urban furniture and space for shelter against the rain. We'd also like to introduce water retention areas. And we'd also like to pilot kind of the power of cycling in the city by introducing a 2-lane cycleway. And after having talked about the street itself, I'd like to invite Christina to talk a bit more about the wider area itself. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christina. I'm from Denmark, and here's my group. Our proposal is to develop Surya Kencana into a cultural sensitive, inclusive and connected neighborhood. And we would like to do so by enhancing existing qualities, existing spaces, the potentials within them, and using subtle interventions. We will use the 3 C's to connect culture and community within the neighborhood. So looking at culture, we see that we have a long history of different communities who are clearly in the neighborhood. We have past frictions and present cohabitation. So how can we tell the story of Sörken and celebrate the cultural diversity here? Looking at the community, when we were walking around, the people told us, the people here are the best. It's an amazing community. Neighbors are super. So how can we sustain the sense of community by opening spaces for social gathering and thriving? Also looking at connectivity, as my colleagues already pointed out, we have main structuring axes that structure the neighborhood into the different functions with trading and residential and underdeveloped, little inviting alleyways. How can we enhance the feeling of connectivity working on those alleyways? For culture, we propose to use a heritage trail that will connect the tangible and intangible elements of heritage within the neighborhood. This is 300 years of history we want to connect. We start the trail at the Botanical Garden, the Gateway and Temple, going through the Dutch Market, which is a vibrant bazaar today, and passing Sörken Street several times and connecting all those places of history and culture. It should be fun, educative, and informative, and for the locals to show their neighborhood and for visitors to enjoy it. We use simple elements as a line on the ground, moments for taking picture, walking around, enjoying the food. Information will be given on facades and integrated in the streetscape and in street art. For the community, we are looking at how we can open public green spaces for them to gather around. We see that the botanical garden is an iconic green element in Bogor, which everyone knows about, but we don't see the hidden backyards, green backyards in Turken. On the left, you see how we propose to open such a green space along the Turken main street for community gardening. And on the right, you can see how an open space can be established along the river with elements of Sundanese culture, for instance, like this saung, and integrating as well the heritage trail I was talking about. Looking at connectivity, we would like to move from the main axis down to the alleyways, making them vibrant, inviting, enhancing encounters. There are already social encounters there today, but they can be made even more attractive, and we can do this also by night, not only by day. So we are working with simple elements like color, lighting. Like you see on those perspectives, you see the different elements we're working with. So as I said, color, lighting, shelter, designing access for the new open spaces I was mentioning, enhancing green and blue elements, incorporating street art, community art, and seating elements. We see benches everywhere in the neighborhood, so sitting and gathering is something we should enhance. So putting it all together, connecting culture and community, we have this heritage trail, those connections through the alleyways, connecting both heritage and green elements. It's a physical connection, but also a social cultural connection. So by this proposal here, we think that Suri Kencana can be an example for multicultural neighborhoods where we respect the community while sharing cultural heritage. We are enhancing connections and livability, and it's social, educative, and touristic for both the locals and the visitors. And we do this by incremental interventions. Finally, I would like to say, Kota Bogor, Kota Hujan, kalau mampir jangan lupa makan. Babak-babak ibu-ibu sekalian, terima kasih sudah mendengarkan.
So not to keep you too long, but just a quick round of applause for all the presenters and our YPPs. So there were several unique things about the YPP journey, especially at this Congress, and one of them, which was from Zainab's own idea, was to present for the first time in the public. And so we had actually a public presentation given by our local counterparts, which went over extremely well, and we even got a chance to interview some locals as they walked by, or rather as we ambushed them as they walked by. So I think that was a success that I hope we can continue on in the YPP tradition. And what I'd like to say too is that this represents for our team, all told, probably 2 days worth of work. And if you can achieve this much in 2 days, imagine what you can achieve in 5 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. I think it's really a testament to their desire to come and really make a difference, and in the tradition of ISOCARP, share their knowledge for better cities. I'd also like to encourage you all to see our poster presentations in the front corridor as you walked in. It requires you to make a vote because we have competition winners being announced during the dinner on Thursday. And with that, I would also just like to have the LOCs and the YPP stand up, and the international coordinators for a big thank you. Stick up your hands. Hopefully you'll take the time to talk with them in the next few days, and maybe these will be your future employees, which would be even better. I'd just like to invite Zainab up to do a formal closing. Okay, I will do the formal closing. No problem. Thank you to all of our partners, particularly the Mayor Bodor, which he was excellent. Not only is his karaoke and dancing good, but his contribution to the YPPs was awesome. And also to the ministry, who will meet tomorrow morning to present the outcomes from the TOD. So thank you again. It's my favorite part of the ISOCARB Congresses, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on the posters in the front hall. Thank you.